everyone. So my name is Kaitlyn Granger. I am doing the presentation today on the canoe downstairs. I don't know if all of you got a good look of it over the last week or so, but if you haven't looked at it in depth before the presentation, maybe after the presentation, you can go back down and have a different perspective of it. But I was the 2026 Artist in Residence with the Raystown Field Station at Juniata. So this is a pretty new program. The Raystown Field Station has only had one other Artist in Residence, and they'll have another one this next year as well. So I'll give you some information. So my project was called Vessels in Balance, Tracing the Currents of Invasive Species. So who am I? I am a Juniata grad, class of 2021. I studied conflict resolution, but also museum studies, which maybe you're thinking, oh, why did you do a project that's maybe more environmental science focused, studio arts focused? But within my curriculum at Juniata, it was very highly interdisciplinary. And when I left Juniata, I worked for the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum out in New Mexico, where I talked a lot about, how the environment influences a person's art. And when I came back to Juniata, I started working for the Baker Institute for Peace and Conflict Studies. And 2 of the years that I worked there, we kind of focused and honed in on how the environment and conflict intervention and resolution kind of work together. So when the Artist in Residency advertisement came up, I was like, oh, this is a wonderful opportunity. I have a lot of friends who do ceramics, who do studio art. This is great for them to do. And I sent it out to like 10 different people. And I have good alumni connections, so I was sending it out to them, and I realized as I was doing that, this would be really fun. I'm just gonna submit something because I have an idea that won't go away. And I kind of did a shot in the dark, and kind of the whole, you miss all the baskets, you don't shoot, one of those things. And it turns out that the idea was interesting for the Raystown Field Station. An artist in residence is kind of like a difficult concept to understand, but what it really means is you go to a place and you're inspired by that place to create an art piece. So it's concentrated time where somebody goes away and creates something. But artist in residencies, I learned from my experience, are a little bit harder than I expected because art doesn't just happen. You don't get inspired in that immediate moment all the time. Sometimes you have writer's block. Sometimes you have, you don't know how you want to approach something. So artists in residencies are really wonderful and interesting. I would have never taken the time to do this project without this experience. I would have never given myself this risk and opportunity. But it was also very challenging for me. It was very different than what I've ever experienced before. Can everyone see the slides?
Can now.
Yeah. I was like, it might be difficult, I'm standing right in the way. I can move if anybody needs it. So once again, I already kind of determined you guys have all seen the project downstairs, but you might have some questions about the project. Why did I do it? What are some of the intentions beyond it? Yeah.
At the end of the canoe, why is there someone getting trapped in seaweed?
I'll talk about that. That's a really good question. That's maybe how I felt sometimes during the project, getting trapped in seaweed. The goal behind the project was to look at invasive species at Raystown Lake. But in some ways, that idea came after the idea to create art out of a retired canoe. That was kind of my going in, that was the thing I really wanted to do. I didn't want to have to I wanted to create something that came from something that was no longer in use. And so I had this idea to kind of paint a canoe that was no longer in use and create it into kind of a movable mural. And so that it could go around the community and kind of serve the same function as a mural, both kind of educating about something but also representing a place. So I had that idea first, and then as I was thinking about what I wanted to do with the canoe, invasive species kind of kept coming up as an interesting thing. I didn't know much about invasive species. I don't come from an environmental science background. But I knew I wanted to do something with water. I wanted to do something with Raystown. I have lived in Huntingdon since 2017, pretty much the whole time. And I have interacted with the lake so much. It's so much part of my Juniata experience and my Huntingdon experience. So yeah, wanted to do a canoe, wanted it to be about Raystown in some ways, wanted to talk about invasive species. But I don't talk about all invasive species that are in Raystown or in waterways around Huntingdon. I focus on three. I focus on hydrilla, which is an aquatic plant, Eurasian water milfoil, which is also an aquatic plant, and zebra mussels. And I picked these three partially because hydrilla and Eurasian water milfoil, we have a long-term relationship, Juniata College and the Raystown Field Station, and the Army Corps of Engineers with doing research together to study these species. So going back many, many years, we have conducted surveys about concentration of these species at the lake. But I wanted to kind of bring in zebra mussels as well because that's a relatively new invasive species at Raystown. And all three of these species primarily spread because, or have spread to Raystown because of boating and human recreation. So all three of them are very, very much connected to boating practices and would connect best to the canoe itself. Why use an old canoe? I kind of already talked about that. These two are highly related to each other. The timeline of the project, the residency required at least 2 weeks staying at Raystown Lake, and the field station was really flexible because I work full-time at the college and I don't have all time in the world to take off, with splitting up those 2 weeks. And those 2 weeks, as I said, were partially to start the project, to do research. I did research before the 2 weeks, talking to community members about invasive species, but the timeline took a lot longer. So I was working in a lot of different conditions, but mostly there's a building on Juniata's campus, and I was working in the garage of it in the winter time, painting. Logan was oftentimes with me in the cold, and then also creating some of the other materials continued this year. So it's been a full year since I began this project. And then who are my collaborators? So the library is one of my collaborators. I used many of the books in the collection. When I was doing research, I talked to professors, I talked with the owners of the marina, I talked to the Army Corps of Engineers, I talked to Rock Outfitters down the road. It would be a shame if I created a piece about something that affects the community and didn't talk to the community. And then why use art? So art is another way of communicating. I used art for my benefit because I need a lot of different ways of learning. I need some visual learning, I need to talk through it, I need some written communication. Art is another way of communicating ideas, and for me it's a lot more of an effective way. It helps break down complex information into digestible pieces. It usually doesn't cover everything, but sometimes it covers a little bit more of the why or the human connection for me. one thing I've talked about too when it comes to what we try to do at Juniata College is a scientist who can't communicate what they learned is not a good scientist, because they need to spread that information around as well. So having that communication skills and knowing how to communicate with various people is really important. Of course, the canoe's downstairs. I'll get to your question about why the person is trapped under the weeds. That's a really, really good question. This is a poem that's on the canoe, and this is, again, kind of different ways of communicating the same message. I have these little handouts downstairs. That's kind of an art magazine, a little one that I created. Michelle, put this one over there, you guys didn't get to see it. These are all different ways of communicating the same things, but the poem I think is nice to read again, so I'm going to read it out loud. The canoe cuts the still water, its bow crafting a path through the current. The paddles, a rhythm of control, below unseen things grow and twist. Alien shells, roots reaching for the surface, green vessels uninvited, persistent. The paddler shifts, guiding, adjusting, aware. The struggle is in the balance, not to break, but to bend. To manage what's beneath without drowning in the tide of changing things. So this is kind of where the person who's kind of reaching out from the weeds, or the seaweed, as you said, this is kind of where it comes in. The way that we manage things that are kind of out of our control, it can feel overwhelming. You can feel like you're drowning in the newness and the changing things, but it's not about, you can't fully take back control. You can try to adjust and guide and keep the balance. I'll as we continue, it'll be easier to explain. But this is kind of a theme throughout my project. Does anybody have any questions so far? Once again, this is another way art communicates complex issues. So this is a cartoon that was made to kind of talk about aquatic invasives, and I thought it was funny. So milfoil and zebra mussels, it says, which are two of the species I'll talk about. So what are invasive species? So they're non-native plants or animals that disrupt a local ecosystem by competing with native species for the same resources. So there's nothing bad about these plants or animals. They're not inherently evil or anything like that. It's just that they're moved to a new environment in which they don't have any competitors, in which they take up more resources and spread at a faster rate. So they outspread, outgrow, outbreed, outmaneuver, outcompete. They have what's called a higher plasticity. I'm not saying that particularly correctly, but basically they have a higher adaptability rate. So with many plants, if you would change the temperature of the water, their likelihood of surviving would dramatically change. Invasive species oftentimes are a little bit more resilient. They can survive in more extreme environments, and they don't have any competitors. Nobody's eating them. And so that makes them able to spread and kind of take over in a little bit of a different way. In terms of my project, I wanted to kind of point out that there's environmental issues with invasive species, but there's also ways in which they negatively affect us. So these species, I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. So hydrilla and Eurasian water milfoil are two of the plant species that I focus on in my project. Something that's kind of important to note or interesting to note is that especially the water milfoil, there's a lot of native water milfoil species. So Eurasian water milfoil at Raystown is invasive. But water milfoil in general maybe is not in terms of our local area. Hydrilla, once again, where it comes from, it's not invasive. But here it is, and it's one of the most common aquatic invasives that people talk about. Why they're a problem is what I'm going to focus on with this presentation, but in terms of like how to identify them, the canoe kind of goes into how to look for them and what to look for. But they're a problem because they grow very rapidly. So hydrilla can grow up to 1 inch per day. That's incredibly fast. There's not many plants that I know of that grow as fast as that. Imagine if you grew 1 inch per day. That would be, without much limit. They can grow up to, I think, 5 feet. So that's really, I mean, how tall are you? Do you know? I'm about, I think on my license it says I'm 6'6". That is not true.
No, you're 5'6".
Oh, I'm sorry, 5'6". It would be really not true if it said 6'6". I'm not 5'6" though. I'm closer to 5'5". But the plant would be as tall as I am. That's pretty crazy. It's also really it's low light tolerance, so a lot of plants have to have a certain amount of light to grow. It can grow in a little bit of a darker environment, so it can grow at deeper depth, like depths of the water. And it spreads pretty quickly. So these two plants, both of them, one of the main ways they spread is through fragmentation. So if you break off a piece, they create a new plant just from that one piece. So imagine if you went to a tree, broke off a branch, and just laid it down, and it would grow a whole new tree. That's kind of the same concept. They also, because of their rapid growth and because of how easy it is for them to spread and grow, they form very thick canopies. And so it blocks out sunlight, which reduces oxygen levels for other plant species and animals. And it can also interfere with recreation. So if you're, let's say you're paddling a canoe or a kayak, or even just taking a boat through, a little piece getting in the motor, or as you're paddling, if you get caught in this big vines, basically, the way to get out of it is kind of you jerk it up and it ends up ripping it and creating more plants. But also fishing, you put a line in the water, you get stuck because you're caught on one of the plants. And all of this kind of goes into displacing native plants. It's interesting too, a lot of people see these plants and they go, great, a habitat for fish. This is great for them to utilize. There's a lot of native plants that do the same thing. This does not help the animals or the plant species as much as the native plants would. I don't know how many of you have been to Roaring Springs recently, but there is a little park with a pond. And that pond, in the past, you could see all the fish moving around, really pretty. Now all you see is hydrilla. It's really, I mean, pretty amazing if you go, because that's maybe a 5-foot deep pond, and all of it's coated. You only see a little bit of water on top. You hardly see any fish. They're there, but they're so underneath the surface of the plants themselves that it's pretty amazing to see how much they have spread. These are photos from Raystown of hydrilla. I think this photo here was taken by the Raystown Field Station. But you can just see how dense these plants grow together. And just think, this is just the surface, how deep those plants are, how tall they are. This is not from Raystown, but you can see the difference. This is the Eurasian water milfoil. Because they're more feather-like, they kind of puff up in the water. But once again, they're very densely packed together. Any questions about the plants? I know I'm going very fast, but I don't want to keep you here for 2 hours. Zebra mussels share some of the same traits as these plants. They're very rapid in growth. So each female, hundreds of thousands to over 1 million eggs annually. One zebra mussel can produce hundreds of thousands every year. So they're incredibly fast producing. They also, just on that as well, we don't have any species of fish or animals that eat zebra mussels at Raystown. Zebra mussels are a really big issue in the Great Lakes. This is a wonderful book. If you haven't read it before and you want to learn more, there are fish in the Great Lakes that have now been adapting themselves to eat zebra mussels, but they can't actually break the shells down. And because zebra mussels are pretty small, they only grow at most about 2 inches big. They can be very, very small, and their babies are microscopic. You can't see them really with the naked eye. Because there's nothing that can really eat them, there's no way we can really control them. They filter water in, which to the eye makes the lake look really pretty. Eventually, you might say, "Oh, look, it's wonderful. The lake looks pure," but it actually is removing and taking away some of the food that the animals are eating, because they filter out the plankton, etc. And so they can alter aquatic food webs. They also, I don't know how many of you have seen zebra mussels at Raystown already. Yeah. They're not everywhere right now, but in the sections they're at, you're not gonna not notice them. I'll show you in a second some of the photos from Raystown where you can see them. But like hydrilla and Eurasian watermilfoil, they grow really packed together. They build on top of each other, and there's photos online where they cover shopping carts, where you can see an entire shopping cart. You know, those are very thin pieces of metal, but they clamp onto everything. So they attach to any hard surface. I've already talked to some people who work with Raystown, and so there's pipes. We get some of our water from Raystown, and there's zebra mussels that coat those pipes and clog it like any pipes can be clogged. The only way to remove them would be to physically go down and scrape them off. But they're also very sharp shells. So for you guys, when you're going and swimming in the ocean, if you see them, don't step on them, because they can cut your feet. They're really, really sharp, and they hold a lot of bacteria, which means that you could get an infection. You guys know what an infection is? Yeah, I'm assuming you did. But because they can attach themselves to everything, they can also impact boats as well. We talked about with hydrilla and Eurasian watermilfoil, they spread primarily through fragmentation. Zebra mussels, because they can attach to things really easily, and because their babies are really, really small, microscopic, they can travel through boats. So if you're boating in Raystown and you get out of the water, if you're sitting in there for maybe a week, you might not realize that you have zebra mussels in your live wells or attached to your engines or anything like that. But one zebra mussel can survive out of the water for 30 days. And as we know, zebra mussels can produce really quickly. These are photos of zebra mussels at Raystown, so you can see them getting all up in machinery. which is not good. They attach to rocks really well, so you wouldn't even see them because they camouflage so well. They look like the rock, so you could just be stepping and not realize. But they also pack on top of each other. I like this cartoon as well. Only you can prevent zebra mussels. And they're talking to boaters. Any questions before we continue? Am I going too fast?
Okay.
So this gets into what especially boaters can do, but everyone can do. So the cartoon just told us, hey, let's especially for people who have boats, including canoes and kayaks, what can you do? So as you remove your boat from the water, it's important that you clean your boat. So all the mud that might be coating it, like even as you're dragging it out of the water, your trailer and gear, you want to drain all the water that you hold in boats, like in live wells, etc. And dry them is the next piece. They say that you should keep your boat out for a week before putting it into any other water, and especially washing it down with hot water. So zebra mussels, the one thing that they're kind of sensitive to is really, really hot water. So I think it's actually closer to like 70-degree water is what they at least need to kind of get removed. But like even soapy water, sorry. But if you keep it out for a week too, that can kind of help when moving it to another waterway. Now, it's not just going to a different state that this matters for. So a lot of people who boat in Raystown also boat in Canoe Creek. Well, if you go to Canoe Creek, you can very easily find hydrilla and Eurasian water milfoil. I haven't seen any zebra mussels in Canoe Creek, but it's a matter of time. This is where it's like, with these particular invasive species, it's kind of when, not if, especially in our areas because it's already in Raystown. They're already in Raystown. But this also applies to other ways in which we do recreation at Raystown. So fishing as well. Logan fishes, and she pulls up hydrilla, Eurasian water milfoil. If you threw the pieces you pulled out right back in the water, because they spread through fermentation, they're just gonna reroot, basically. So, I mean, the better thing to do would be to take all that stuff and throw it away, or like bait you use. Don't put that in the water. You throw it away in the trash can. So there's a lot of different ways in which human interaction impacts the spread of these invasive species. I'm gonna go all the way back to the boat itself. So my goal in kind of creating this work was to educate in these sections about how to identify these species. And kind of like you would read a page from left to right, kind of go into how we scientifically identify where we have the highest concentration. If you go downstairs, you'll see the lake in its entirety. This is what the lake would look like if you were flying over top. And on it you see different points, the different dots with rings around them. So that is data that was collected by the Raystown Field Station and the Army Corps of Engineers to determine where do we have the highest concentration of these invasive species. So this particular survey is about hydrilla. So over the course of many years, but these are 2 different years of data, we can see where there's been higher or lower concentration. It's harder to see here, it's easier to see downstairs, but you read those like tree rings. So closer to the dot, that's the older data. The newer data is on the outside. Hopefully, the next round of data, I can add that and add the third tree ring to that. But whenever you see a red inner circle go to green, that's because the Army Corps has gone in and actually treated those areas with herbicides. So with the plants, there is a way for us to kind of chemically treat for them. It's a limited scope. It's not, it has to be done on a really regular basis. It's not, it's expensive. So it's not like they can do this for all the lake. It's a really, really big lake. So they try to focus on areas in which people use it the most. So where there's a boating launch, it's likely that they would treat that area because they know that the more people who use that particular entry and exit way, the greater spread can happen. So it'll be interesting if you guys go downstairs later on. Just take a look where you see maybe a change over time, where there's been a lot of hydrilla and now there's a little bit less. Where it's been consistent, that means that we probably haven't treated it. There's a couple spots where you see yellow. That means there was some, it was present, but there's not a super high concentration, and it's still yellow. You can probably tell then that it's maybe not a highly used area. There's not a lot of human interaction with that area. And so I think it's interesting to see how we've interacted with these species to help mitigate them. And on this side, you kind of see other ways in which human interaction helps. Helps is the key word. We can't completely change what is happening.
That's a survey location of hydrilla.
Yeah.
Black.
Yeah, so all these areas where there's a dot, somebody has done a survey there, and basically they do that by taking a big rake and pulling and going into the water and pulling out back onto shore what they're finding, and they can see how much of the hydrilla, how much of that plant is in that particular location. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. And kind of interesting that the way that they're surveying is through something that is also pretty simple. Yeah, does anybody have any big questions regarding the piece itself? I can go back to.
They did just treat in the last couple of weeks, so now is a good time to look for hydrilla because over the next couple months it will start to die off in the areas that were treated.
And the treatment isn't harmful for other plant or native species life. That's something that I think people might have they might say, oh, you're putting poison into the lake, or they might just have a different perception of what's happening. It's treating a very specific thing. Yes, it has some impact, but controlling these species is really important, and so it's kind of worth it.
What's the mitigation for the other two?
The water milfoil, I believe, there is a herbicide for that as well. I think it's probably the same.
Yeah, we primarily target the hydrilla because it is a little more of an issue in Raystown, and I mean the way it works really is that these are pellets. It's not like a spray or liquid or something crazy that's going into the water. It's safe to swim around, all of that. They look like little white clay pellets, and over time they slowly release. And because invasive plants grow so quickly compared to native plants, it's not actually that it's even targeting that species, it's just that they will uptake it before anything else can, and then it will kill them and not the native plants that are left behind. For zebra mussels, they are testing a molluscicide, but they have yet to, they're still working with their research team to, the Corps is, to make sure they have all the water parameters and everything accounted for to see if it'll be successful.
And with the Great Lakes, like they've been dealing with these issues for a lot longer period of time, and they don't have great solutions either for zebra mussels. Actually, it's really interesting, and yeah, if you want an interesting book, this is definitely a good one. The level of kind of state-to-state regulation of you know, there are people who are getting crazy fines because they didn't clean their boat properly, and they are actively spreading these species. I mean, I wouldn't, if I was traveling to boat, I don't think I would have as much awareness. But it was amazing to just think about like how significant a threat is that states are actually making the decision to set these very, very expensive thousands of dollar fines in order to try to, because they're also losing a lot of money in recreation. Some of the beaches that used to be the best for tourism and bringing in a lot of money to the area are now not as enjoyable because of these species, especially the zebra mussels in this context. That's interesting for our area, how that could affect our tourism.
Kaitlyn, you had asked a question about the piece. Did you consider ways other than words to convey the negative effects of these invasives, like the thick mats or the depleted oxygen? How you might?
I did, but I didn't maybe explore that to the extent I could have. I think that I was worried if I put too many of the native species in, it would be hard to fully focus on the invasives that I was specializing in, because you would have to be able to clearly say, hey, these are the ones that I'm talking about. So I think I was worried about putting on other like fish or other plant species, because I was worried I wouldn't be able to maybe communicate the differences enough. And yeah, I mean, there are plenty of other invasives that I didn't touch on. Like Asian clam is another one that I chose not to focus on. And it's interesting, as I kind of said before, a lot of these species people are so used to. Like somebody the other day was like, oh, you're talking about waterweed. It's like, oh yeah, I mean, you look at it every day. You do, if you go to the lake, you do see these species. You just don't maybe know that they're as negative as they are. And at what point does something become kind of native to the community? If it's been there, the Raystown has been here 52 years, but it's not native to the area. We created Raystown Lake. And so when it comes to these plant species as well, or to the zebra mussels, at what point do people go and, oh, we've always had this? The land does adapt, these environments do adapt. It just will be different than it used to be. Zebra mussels, we were first starting to see it more in 2019, 2020. We started having kind of our earliest reportings that people were talking about. Well, now it's 2026, and they're a lot more present than they were a few years ago. I would say in the next 2 years, it's going to spread even more rapidly, and more people are going to be talking about them than they are now. There was less recreation at the lake last year because the campsites weren't open, etc. And maybe there was a little bit of less boating. This is another year of a full season. How will people who are using the lake, we're camping next week, and a lot of our family members have boats. And it's been nice because I've been able to bond with, my partner's uncle more, because I'm talking to him about, oh, this is how you can take care of your boat to make sure it doesn't hurt your boat for next year's season. But he's also a major fisherman. So how do you make sure you're not taking things into Canoe Creek? In terms of learning more, I know I've talked a lot, but there is an event going on July 24th at 6 p.m. That will be at the Raystown Lake Visitor Center. Kid-friendly, maybe a little bit more kid-friendly than my presentation, I apologize. And also there will be a kind of paddling tour, kayak and canoe tour, of some spots, where we'll talk about invasive species with Rothrock. So, we're gonna be setting that up sometime in the summer, so keep your eyes peeled. Alright. I do have, downstairs, these are downstairs. These are some molds of hydrilla, Eurasian water milfoil, that Logan fished out of the water, and so they're going to be downstairs too. There's a great book display as well that you can rent. You can check out books with the library, and this will be here. The boat will be here. All of this next week, and then in July it will go to Staten Learning Commons at Juniata. Thanks. That's it. And yeah, I'm around. I have my contact information if anybody has any questions later on.
Thank you
Thanks
very
so
much.
much.